Okay, so what's up, Dayton Bulldogs, with another video, and tonight, well, today we are gonna be doing a reaction to a brand new food theory video, and this one will be Tony's Chocolonely secret. And sorry about that. Let's really rate that. And I'll say it again. Tony's Chocolonely's secret plan to steal horses. Yeah, sorry about that. Anyway, before we get into it, hit the bell icon so you get notified whenever we upload those and go live on Dayton Bulldogs. Also, go look at old videos, come back to this video, like and comment on all the videos, including this video, and there's no cap as well. Like, comment, subscribe, tell us what you want us to write tonight. Let's see and find out what this will be about. Let's go.
Chocolate is one of the greatest gifts the world has to offer. However,
that's kinda true, no good.
hidden behind that delicious exterior are some dark secrets. And I'm not talking about dark chocolate. But there is one company out there who's trying to make the cocoa industry just a little bit sweeter. Hello, Internet! Welcome to Food Theory, the show where I'm a chocolate hater, but also a chocolate appreciator. In fact, I even dedicated an entire episode to making and trying over a
Well, yeah, that's true, no good.
dozen hot chocolates to see which one was the best. Go and check it out if you haven't yet. But while researching for that episode, I realized that the chocolate industry is chock full of a lot of serious issues that need to be addressed. From child and forced labor to unsustainable farming practices. There's a lot that goes into making a chocolate bar, and it's not all tasty. However, there are many individuals and companies out there who are working their tails off to try and fully eliminate these problems from the chocolate supply chain. But one company, with its colorful candy bars, is probably the most well-known fighting this fight. Tony's Chocolonely. Right now, most of you watching are probably thinking one of two things. Either, yay, I love Tony's, let's go! Or, Tony's Choco who now? Which, fair. While Tony's certainly isn't up with the big boys like Hershey's, Nestle, or Mars, they're gaining a larger market share each year. But what sets them apart from all the movers and shakers is their goal of ending all exploitation in the entire cocoa industry. Man, I thought I had big goals. Now, among the new hosts of Theorists, I know I'm obviously the funny one, but we're gonna be talking about some pretty heavy topics this episode. So I apologize in advance that this will be a bit lighter on the joke front, obviously. So if these sorts of topics are too heavy for you, I totally understand if you want to sit this one out. But this episode won't be all doom and gloom. If you stay till the end, I promise you that we'll finish off with some actual good news we're seeing in the world of chocolate. So get ready to break off a piece of chocolate knowledge as we unwrap the dark secrets behind the chocolate industry and see how Tony's and many other amazing people are working to make exploitation in big chocolate a thing of the past. And listen, this episode may be bittersweet, but you know what else I never joke about? My health. Which is why I'm so happy to be back partnering with our sponsor for today's video, ZocDoc. We've worked with ZocDoc a few times now because we really believe in the help they give searching and comparing high-quality doctors for your needs. When I moved back to Miami, I needed to find someone to help keep my meat soup feeling as sweet as Tony's Chocolonely. And ZocDoc helped me find a primary care doctor just 7 minutes away from me, or only 2 hours in Miami traffic. And the reviews really helped me narrow down my choices by letting me see not only what people would say about the doctors, but also the office in general. And I haven't looked back. ZocDoc makes it easy to book in-network appointments with more than 100,000 healthcare providers. You can filter for doctors by specialties and see reviews by verified patients so you can choose the best, most convenient care for you. Definitely stops you from feeling chocolonely trying to find a good doctor. Flu season's coming up.
It does stop you from being chocolonely for doctors, no gambling.
And the last thing you want is to be scrambling when you're already sick. ZocDoc helps you get appointments fast, typically within just 24 to 72 hours of booking. And you can even score same-day appointments. So if you want to feel less stress surrounding your health, go to ZocDoc.com/thefoodtheorist or click the link in the description to find a top-rated doctor today. Thank you so much to ZocDoc for sponsoring us. Now let's get back to some chocolate. before we can fully explain what Tony's Chocolonely is doing to try and end all forms of exploitation in the chocolate industry, naturally, we need to explain what that exploitation is and why it's happening. Obviously, I don't need to tell you that chocolate is big business. Each year, we produce around 5 million metric tons of cocoa beans, which in turn is turned into all of our favorite chocolate products. It's no wonder that the entire world's chocolate industry is valued at around $123 billion. But despite the fact that we as a species have gone full cocoa nuts, we can't actually grow cocoa everywhere we'd want to. You see, chocolate comes from cocoa beans, which grow on cocoa trees. But cocoa trees, they're a bit fickle. In order to grow, cocoa trees need consistent high temperatures, high humidity, plenty of rain, minimum wind, nitrogen-rich soil. You get the point. They're divas. As a result,
Yeah, that's the.
more or less, cocoa trees can only grow in a narrow band around the equator, between 20 degrees north and south latitude, which means that the beans used to make every chocolate bar, candy, and spread you've ever tasted likely came from either Central or South America, Southeast Asia, or most likely the biggest producer of chocolate in the world by far, West Africa. West
Yeah, that's true. No cable.
African nations in total grow around 70% of the world's cocoa beans, with the vast majority of that coming from just two countries, Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire. So if you're going to be a big player in the world of chocolate, you have to source your beans from West Africa. The only problem is, chocolate isn't supposed to be grown there. Cocoa trees were originally only found in the New World, enjoyed by civilizations like the Olmecs, Maya, and Aztecs for literally thousands of years before the Europeans arrived. But of course, as soon as they tasted it, the Europeans loved it and began to try and grow it everywhere they could, including West Africa. The problem is, despite producing the vast majority of the world's cocoa beans, farmers in West Africa don't often enjoy the sweet rewards. For example, once the cocoa beans are harvested, they're often shipped out of the countries that grew them and into Europe and North America. It's here where those beans are turned into all of our favorite chocolate treats. And that's where the real money in chocolate is made. Unfortunately, the farmers, who are mostly small local growers, are not able to reap all the money from their labor. As small farmers, the power to set prices is really held in the hands of the buyers, leading to bargain prices for what is essentially liquid gold. In fact, according to some estimates, the average cocoa farmer in West Africa makes less than $1 a day.
Okay. Alexa, send a voicemail to Window Queen.
To send text
Amazon Alexa.
setting up
Now,
communications
set
in
up
the Alexa app.
encourage your
Ask the device
viewers to
owner
share
invite
your
you
live
to
and
the app.
invite
Then
more
follow the
friends.
instructions.
Hang on, guys. Hey Alexa, send a voice message to Window Queen.
Okay, AJL. Did you mean Raina the Window Queen Raina?
Yes.
What's your voice message?
I'm reacting to another film I'm reacting to...
Ready to send?
Yes.
Sending now.
Send a voice message to Window Queen.
Okay, AJL. Did you mean Raina the Window Queen Raina?
Yes.
What's your voice message?
Is what I meant. I'm reacting to the food video now, so yeah. Tony's chocolate, so yeah. Also, if you want to come back to my
Ready
live,
to send?
yes.
Sending now.
Far below the international poverty line of $3.
What time is it?
The time is 4:11 p.m.
Okay.
Unable to even afford the product they work so hard to make. And when you're forcing farmers to make ends meet on tight margins, that's when the door for real abuses start to creep in. Some farmers, not just in West Africa, but Brazil as well, have resorted to using child labor in order to make ends meet or make their prices competitive. In Cote d'Ivoire and Ghana alone, it's estimated that around 2.1 million children work on cocoa farms. And this
Okay.
isn't like working on your uncle's farm. It's backbreaking work. Literally. Harvesting cocoa involves being hunched over for hours on end, wielding sharp machetes, and being exposed to tons of pesticides. Not the kind of work we want kids doing for literally pennies a day. And that's assuming they're being paid at all. Because, unfortunately, many of these children who are working on these farms are subjected to forced labor. I'm not gonna lie, I read way too many stories of kids who were forced into working on cocoa farms for no pay. Ripped
Yeah.
away from their families. It was pretty freaking heartbreaking. And of course, it's not just the workers who are suffering under this broken system. The environment suffers as well. Each year, thousands of acres of forests are cleared to make room for more and more cocoa farms. In Indonesia, the third leading producer of cocoa in the world, it's estimated that around 1.7 million acres of forest were cleared for cocoa farms between 1988 and 2007. This, along with other unsustainable agricultural practices means that in the future, it'll be even harder for farmers to cultivate cocoa. That's not even including climate change, which also threatens to shrink available cocoa farmland over the next few decades. Now, of course, none of these problems, particularly that of child labor, are at all new. It's been known about for years. In fact, all the way back in 2001, 8 of the biggest chocolate makers in the world, including the big brands you all know, signed an agreement attempting to, quote, eliminate the worst forms of child labor. Because apparently there's good forms of child labor. This agreement, known as the Harkin-Engel Protocol, had some pretty ambitious goals, eliminating 70% of the worst forms of child labor in the cocoa industry. And at least as of 2020, not only have they not met that target at all, but child labor rates in some regions have remained unchanged or have even increased. Thankfully, this hasn't stopped journalists from holding Big Chocolate's feet to the fire, especially one particular Dutch journalist. In 2003, 2 years after the Harkin-Engel Protocol was signed, 3 Dutch journalists, including a man named Toon van de Koken, produced a TV documentary that focused on all the things that we've talked about so far today. And fed up with the problems he saw, Toon decided he was gonna raise some hell. He marched right down to his local candy store, bought and ate a chocolate bar from one of the big brands, and went to a police officer and demanded to be arrested. Why? I hear you. And the cop asking, because
Okay.
thanks to his journalism, he knew that some of the chocolate was made using illegal child labor. And in the EU, it's illegal to know that crimes are being committed and participate in it. The idea being that if one person got arrested for eating chocolate, that would mean that the bigwigs would have to change their ways before every chocolate-eating European was behind bars. Now, obviously, that didn't work. But that didn't stop Toon from advocating with Big Chocolate directly. Around this time, they were filming the remake of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. You know, this one.
Good morning, Starshine. The Earth says hello.
At the time, Nestle had the rights to the Wonka candy brand. Toon lobbied Nestle to create a child labor-free bar. You know, since the movie features children being sent through a chocolate-themed hellhole. Nestle passed on the idea, and Toon thought, fine, I'll make one myself. In 2005, Toon created his own chocolate brand, naming it after the English version of his name, Tony. And thus, Tony's Chocolonely was born. And yeah, by the way, it is Chocolonely. This entire time, I've
Interesting.
been saying Chocolonely because it sounds way better. But there's a good reason for the name. Toon thought that he was all alone in his
Chocolonely. I want some chocolonely. Like
efforts to try and change the chocolate industry. Thus, Chocolonely. Get it? There's even more lore packed into the bars themselves. Unlike a Hershey's bar, which is broken into 12 even sections, called pips, the pieces of a Tony's bar is split up into these uneven sections, a representation of the inequality in the cocoa industry. See? Clever and fun. But wait, there's more. 5 of those shapes, specifically these 5, are designed to roughly resemble the shapes of countries that make up the West African chocolate trade. However, it's easy to say that you're gonna create a chocolate bar that tries to eliminate child labor and injustices in the chocolate trade. It's another thing to actually do it. How does Tony's actually plan to put their money where their cocoa is? Well, thankfully, Tony has laid out pretty plainly how they ensure to create as ethical a chocolate bar as they can, through what they call their 5 sourcing principles. Let's go through these one by one, in no particular order. One of the big things we talked about in this episode that leads to the increased rate of child and forced labor in the cocoa industry is the fact that farmers just weren't being paid a living wage. So Tony's first sourcing principle is simple: pay farmers more. Tony's, since its inception, has been what is known as fair trade certified. This means that Tony's pays its farmers a fair price based on the value of their product, not just the minimum price that Big Chocolate is willing to pay. In fact, not only does Tony's pay fair trade prices, they pay even more, paying what is known as the living income reference price, the price farmers need to be paid to, make a living. In 2005, this comes out to $2.68 per kilogram of beans in Ghana and $3.09 per kilogram in Cote d'Ivoire. That's around 75 to 80% more than the legal minimums set by those countries, ensuring that farmers can afford to hire adults to work their farms. The second principle Tony's uses to create ethical cocoa is by making their entire supply chain traceable. Every single bean that goes into a Tony's Chocolonely bar can be traced to a specific known farmer that Tony's works with, tracked with their fancy schmancy bean tracker. This also involves actively monitoring their supply chain to ensure they sniff out any child labor practices that arise. Tony's uses the Child Labor Monitoring and Remediation System, or CLAMMERS. This involves working with local communities to identify any child labor practices, working with families to identify the cause, and doing follow-up visits to ensure that children remain where they're supposed to be, at school, having fun. And yes, that does mean that even Tony's sometimes has child labor, but never forced labor, sneak into their supply chains. According to their annual transparency report, the child labor prevalence rate among their suppliers was 8.3%, and just 3.9% among their longest-term partners, which I know is higher than zero, but it's far below the industry average. And think about it, if that's the number Tony's is seeing by actively looking, what are the rates of the shadier companies? The last three sourcing principles that Tony's uses go hand in hand, and that's working hand in hand with the farmers. Tony's works with what are known as co-ops, groups of small farmers who band together to share facilities and best practices, and negotiate better prices. Tony's also makes sure they create long-term relationships with these co-ops, so those farmers feel like they have a reliable source of income and can invest more heavily in the equipment and best practices to make sustainable cocoa. Tony's also works to ensure that the cocoa that goes into their bars is of the highest quality and most sustainable, including sharing best techniques with farmers to ensure higher yields and preventing massive deforestation. Heck, they even use GPS to monitor deforestation. Together, all five of these sourcing principles allows Tony to be the leader in ethically sourcing their cocoa. In fact, according to Chocolate Scorecard, an annual report that grades every chocolate company on their ethics and sustainability, Tony's ranks number one with a 92% rating. The sad thing is, only 4 companies are in the top category for this. Of course, this does come at a cost. Literally, Tony's Chocolonely bars are not cheap. A 6.35 ounce bar costs almost $6, while a 7.5 ounce giant Hershey bar costs just $4.52. And even despite that higher price tag, Tony's is still yet to turn a profit. But that hasn't dissuaded Tony's from striving for their true goal, to completely root out unethical practices in the cocoa industry. But is any of it really working? I know, this hasn't exactly been what you would call a happy episode of Food Theory. But, sometimes the food industry is just plain gross. And not
That's true.
just pineapple on pizza gross. However, as I promised at the start of the episode, I do want to share that there really is some good news out there. Because you know what? While Tony's hasn't completely ended the atrocities in cocoa, they do seem to be making a real positive difference. First off, Tony's Chocolonely isn't so lonely anymore. In 2019, Tony's created Tony's Open Chain, an organization that partners with other chocolate makers and suppliers to help them also follow Tony's 5 sourcing principles. To date, 19 other companies have signed on to Tony's Open Chain initiative, including Aldi, Ben & Jerry's, Huel, and even Feastables, the first major U.S. chocolate brand to join. Nice job, Jimmy. And even among the big players who aren't part of Tony's Open Chain, it's clear that many of them are making some effort to do better, even if they're still missing those lofty targets. Remember that chocolate scorecard I mentioned earlier, the one that Tony's aced? Nestle ended up finishing 5th on that list overall, just missing out on their leading the industry on policy and implementation label. In fact, Nestle actually gets high marks for its transparency, traceability, living income, and child and forced labor, which shouldn't be a surprise. Because remember CLAMMERS? Nestle, along with the International Cocoa Initiative, were the ones who first adapted the system for the cocoa industry. The only thing Nestle really needs to work on is forestry and pesticide use. Other big players in the industry, like Hershey's, but especially Mars, are on the higher end of the scorecard and showing slight improvement. Meanwhile, brands like Starbucks and General Mills are doing doing not as well. Better than Kellanova and Mondelez, who didn't even bother filling the survey out. Not a good look. But it's not just the companies where we're seeing good news. We're seeing many of the countries in West Africa raise their legal minimum prices that suppliers must purchase cocoa at, ensuring that more money goes to the pockets of all the farmers. In Ghana, we're also seeing the country come out and say that they're working to make sure that a larger portion of the raw beans they harvest goes to making chocolate products in Ghana, rather than being shipped to Europe and North America. And you know what? Most of that would not have been possible without Tony's serving as the canary in the cocoa mine, proving that, yeah, sourcing cocoa beans ethically is tough, but it can be done. And the impact it can have on small farmers the world over is immense. So what does this mean for you? Well, we actually play a big part in this. The more we support brands like Tony's and others that are working so hard to remove bad actors from the chocolate industry, the quicker we can get to a future where none of this is happening. It's not cheap and it may not be convenient, but it's literally life-saving. So, Tony,
That's true.
you weren't kidding with your slogan. Crazy about chocolate, serious about people. But here's a crazy idea. Since you're not lonely anymore, maybe change the name to Chocolonely. It tastes better on the tongue, like your chocolate. But hey, that's just a theory. A food theory.
Yes, it is.
Buen provecho. And if you're going cuckoo for more chocolate content, click the card on screen to watch me find out which chocolate, including Tony's, makes the perfect cup of hot chocolate. And as always, I'll see you next week.
Okay. That will be the end of the reaction. If you like the reaction, make sure to like, comment, subscribe. Tell us what you want us to write next. Take them $4 and we are out.